Are you a business owner looking for real advice and input? You're in the right place. From concept to launch to growth, funding, and beyond. Welcome to Startup Hustle with your hosts. One once sold a business for $150 million. The other, the author of $1 Million Bedroom. Here are your hosts of Startup Hustle, Matt DeCoursey and Matt Watson.
1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. 'Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.
And we're back. Another episode of Startup Hustle. Matt DeCoursey here with Matt Watson. Hi, Matt.
I don't know if we can talk today without proper disclaimers.
Breaking the law. Like that?
I'm nervous.
You're worried that
Nervous.
you're going to speak out of turn?
Yeah, I should say something I shouldn't say or something.
Is that a common legal issue?
Yes.
With and around you?
Yes.
I'm worried that we're going to unveil a whole lot of reasons today why we haven't properly set up the business known as Startup Hustle.
We don't have any documentation about Startup Hustle as a business.
I
What do
guess
you mean?
that's a great point. And even though
This is a business?
Yeah, and by the way, even though we don't like to talk about timestamp things, go Chiefs!
Woohoo!
Trying to turn the sign red as we speak. But anyway.
Yeah, so everybody can see it on the podcast.
So with us today, we have, well, you know what? I do need to mention that today's episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Fullscale.io. Help you build software development teams quickly and affordably,
Oh,
right?
yeah. So you can win.
Now, with us today, we have Sheila Seck, who is the owner and managing partner of Seck Associates. Now, I want you to be interactive and go to Seck, that's SECK, associates.com, so you can see what we're talking about today. Hello, Sheila.
Good morning. What a great day.
It is a great day here.
We're all wearing red.
It is. We are all wearing red, which you can see firsthand on the Startup Hustle YouTube channel. You can see the big smiles that we have on our faces because our hometown Chiefs are
yeah.
Super Bowl champions. It's now in like a week and a half or 2 weeks when this comes out. It won't seem like a big deal. But today, we're winning. Okay. And then back to law.
Oh,
It
no.
always gets back to law.
Yeah. So, well, first off, Sheila, we've actually used your services before, so we can say that has gone well. We've invited you to come in to talk about common startup legal issues, and that could theoretically be like a 10-part series. I'm sure we're going to try to keep it somewhat streamlined, which isn't something lawyers are great at always.
We're not known for that.
No.
We'll try, though.
We won't do any redlining of this episode. Do you want to give us a little background about your firm? And once again, seckassociates.com is a good place to go check that out. But what you guys do, and, like law, just saying you're a lawyer is kind of like saying, yeah, I work in tech.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So we are a law firm that helps businesses transition through the change, navigate change. And we work with a lot of tech startups. So startups typically have some unique things to consider: protection of intellectual property. Kind of start with the goals of the founders. What do they want? Do they want to have partners? Are they going to raise capital? Do they have enough revenue generation that they don't need to bring in partners? Do they hate a partner they want to buy out? So there's a broad range of things that happen during a startup phase.
I keep saying yes in my head.
Yeah. To which part?
Everyone,
Wait a minute.
every entrepreneur has a bad partner story.
Yes.
Yeah,
100%.
actually. Yeah. And I mean, I even have one that I wrote about in a book. A lot of times people start businesses and then figure out a lot of the details afterward,
Right.
Which, I mean, there's reasons for that, because I think a lot of people have accidentally started their business.
Yes.
Well, you don't know if this thing's going to work.
Yeah,
Right.
sure. Like you're
like,
kind of monkeying around.
We're going to set up a
revenue,
lemonade stand. We don't really know what's going to happen, but we'll set it up. And then if it goes really well, you're
Next
like,
thing
oh,
you know,
man.
there's a line around the corner,
Yeah.
and you're like, wait, do we need to franchise this? And that's where things get kind of scary.
Right.
I've made a lot of these mistakes myself, and it does not to be a total shill here, but in my book, $1 Million Bedroom, I pretty much write about all the stupid shit we did getting the business started up, and have continued over the 10 years since then to watch people make a lot of really common and at this point predictable mistakes.
Agreed.
Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. And I think Matt makes a good point that when you're just getting started and you don't have a lot of money and you're like, is this a real business? You don't want to spend your limited capital on attorney. So you might do it yourself or use LegalZoom or something like that.
I did that before, and that's not always the best approach.
I mean, some things, especially software related things, kind of start as like weird little side projects.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a couple people get together and they're like, I want to make this weird thing that solves this problem. Maybe somebody will like it. I'll use it. We have no idea where this is going to go. Probably will go nowhere 90% of the time.
Well, and I think that's sometimes why you don't spend a ton of money building the legal structure around it, because you're like, okay, I'm already like out on a limb here. At the same time, you got to start to build some.
Right. Again, it's a balancing act, but I've often seen some startups who end up doing really well, but when they were poor, they gave away like 25% of their business for 10 grand.
Yeah.
So it's a huge windfall for early investors. And I would often feel sorry for those founders who've done all the heavy lifting. And
so when do you think people need to get some legal paperwork in place?
I think that's a good place to start.
When is that time?
I think when you think that you have a real business, if, like you said, if it's a side project and you don't really know, but the minute you bring on a partner or think, I'm going to go to market with this, you need to have that all
at
in
least
place.
by the time you start getting some revenue coming in, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, easily by then. Yeah.
If you've gotten to that far and
You're
you don't
probably
have
too
some
late.
stuff in place,
I think if you're putting any amount of money into it is also a pretty good
Investing
signal
money.
flag that like that's a green, like, hey, we should probably get some things lined out. Now,
I mean, I don't mean not like $10 a month for your GoDaddy website.
no,
hosting,
right.
but
like if
any
you're like,
kind of
hey,
real
I'm
consequential
right.
money.
So is it now? I've actually had. It's funny. I created what I call the agreement to agree,
Yeah.
which is I don't know, maybe legally
Is that
binding.
a handshake?
No, it's not. It's actually just like I
It's a
jokingly.
fist bump.
No, it's a one-page piece of paper that says, "Hey, we have the intention to do something here, but we acknowledge that we don't have that fully defined.
Yeah.
But we're gonna. It's so one person doesn't run away with the other thing, or like I don't know. I mean, it's like I said, it's kind of just an agreement in principle that, hey, we're partnering on something. We've got a lot to define, and this and that, and it makes me feel a little better about continuing to. Like I said, it doesn't define equity, ownership, anything like that. It's kind of, I don't even know if that's
Helpful.
applicable. Yeah, but it feels helpful.
Probably the only thing is if somebody took an idea and it became really valuable, you would have some evidence that you were going to be a partial owner.
Well, that's
But
part of it.
At
Yeah.
the most, it
Yeah.
doesn't bring you much protection, though.
Yeah, I get it. No, I get it.
I would
I
say-
think what it does is it calms the mind and it puts you on a path towards doing real stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so with common startup legal issues, and I don't even think I think we need to broaden this out to just startup businesses in
Yep.
general, not even just tech. What's the number one thing you see people flopping on?
That they don't get their ownership and buy sell in place with all their partners.
Yeah, amen on that.
And then as the additional is that they give way too much equity away early on to people who aren't really key to the business.
What do you mean by buy sell?
What happens if somebody wants out of the business, if somebody dies, if you have conflict, who gets to vote on certain things, what's going to happen when things are not in the honeymoon stage.
So, by the way, this is a good opportunity, and this wasn't intended to be anything other than informative. But I mentioned that you actually helped us set up Full Scale.
I think so. Yeah.
You did.
Right.
Yeah. And with that, you put a few things in there that I hadn't actually seen before. But one of the things, and we're not going to get into the details of it, but I'd never seen a marital joinder or certain things like that. And, these are things that give some definition to, you mentioned the buy sell,
right.
Like what happens if, someone dies, gets divorced, something like that. And
if Matt dies, I do not want to be business partners with his wife.
Exactly. And that's very
I
common.
love you, Jill, but
well, and she doesn't want to do that either. So there were things in there that would define what that potential value
Those are the scenarios
would
that
or
can
could
happen.
be.
And those are all the things we talk with clients about, like what are the triggering events that would change
Yeah.
the business in a dramatic way, and how do you as owners want to handle that? It's can be very customized.
Yeah, and I was surprised.
wait a second. Jill might be a better business partner than you.
No.
No,
Do you know why?
no.
Because she's not interested or passionate about the business.
Yeah.
And
True.
that's where that's a problem. Now, I was surprised to be surprised at having not seen that prior, because I've seen things that all right, so my dad is an attorney, and that gives me very little experience with law other than him talking about it with me over the years. I mean, I hate it when people are like, my dad's a lawyer, and okay, but you're not.
Right.
That's dumb. But with that, we've had a lot of conversations. And one thing he always kind of impressed upon me was that a good contract it covers rainy and sunny days.
Right.
It's like fences make good neighbors.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make with their original documentation is that they only consider sunny days.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they end up fighting.
I
you
had
went
this-
through that event, didn't you?
Well, yes, I did. But even more recently, I had this issue with me and a couple friends bought something together, and we were going to share it together.
Oh, yeah.
And then one of us decides that we don't want to share it together, but we have no way to unwind this thing.
Or buy out. 'Cause
Yes.
typically, we always have what happens if one partner wants out? Are
Yeah.
you, the rest of you willing to buy him out? Or
Which, by the way, is common in very early stage
Yes.
businesses, because if you have 3 founders, 2 of them are passionate and one of them might not be, and then they want to step out. Now, the issue you have, I kind of ran into that with the very first business I started, and this is what I talked about in $1 Million Bedroom, is I sold too much of my company for too little. And then I had a 25% partner that wasn't making any contribution.
like my
and-
original example.
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing is as I realized we were really onto something, I had to put myself in a situation where I felt comfortable doing all the work, which meant in order to do that, I needed to feel like I had to buy back that 25%. And the reason was there was things that I wanted to do over and above what we were doing. He didn't want to do any of them because it would cost money to basically research and develop some things. And I just didn't like having to continually explain that. And we had equal voting rights, even though I owned 75%, he owned 25%. It just
You
wasn't.
did need a good lawyer.
It wasn't planned out well. Well,
Right.
we did literally legal zoomed it.
Well, and back in my Vin Solutions days, we ran into the problem of needing to fire one of the partners.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's-
And you guys had the goofiest structure that I've
In the
heard
early
about,
days
like,
of that business,
that
it was
super
set up
majority
where like
thing.
everybody had to agree.
That's and that's tough.
And that's really hard because in that case, a minority shareholder can really be a veto if
Yes.
you need supermajority.
And that was 5 people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Getting 5 people to agree on anything
Right.
is tough. And then also when you get down the road and the stakes get a little higher, people have different motivations. Like you had mentioned at one point, as you came closer to an exit, there became some minor squabbles around like just the path, or like once you realize, oh wow, this is
worth
this is
something.
pretty damn valuable. It became almost like a land grab kind of feeling. And, I mean, but I think that's kind of natural at that point. I mean,
Right.
do you want, okay, so if you're going to get the difference between 20 or $30 million, is that worth
Haggling a bit.
maybe?
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. So, by the way, I want to second your motion, Your Honor. I see this all the time. People throwing around equity like they're like they're firing a money gun at a strip club. I mean, because it really is there. And you hear, oh, well, I'm giving this person 20%. I'm like, it would start with 2.
Right. And have it
2.
vested, or they have to forfeit it if they leave. There's a lot of protection.
I think the vesting thing. And so how do you do that? Vesting is giving someone a proportionate share compared to the amount of time that they have offered useful or valid service. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, or you give them an equity grant, some amount of equity, but they don't. It's subject to forfeiture until like 1 year, 2 years, and then they own it all.
I think that's the most important thing here is the vesting.
I think the
Super
mistake
important.
that people make is they try to give someone 20% of the company, and for someone that is also collecting a salary that doesn't even have like a specific type, like where's the value?
Well,
like you're just giving away equity to give it away. And
here's the other part of this, right? Is you start this business and you need help, right?
Yes.
So you throw equity at people to get their help and to maybe get some people you can't afford, get them to take a lower salary. All that stuff makes sense, right? But then let's say the business starts going well. I convince you to come work for Stackify or whatever to be a salesperson because supposedly you're a good salesperson. Well, then
Supposedly.
then the business starts to grow, and then I figure out you're a terrible sales manager, and you are not like you can be a salesperson, but you are not like the future brain trust of director of sales or any of that kind of stuff.
probably true.
Now what do I do?
That happens all
Yeah.
the time.
Now what do I do?
Typically, we draft clawbacks for if somebody's fired for cause, or we can buy at a heavily discounted amount. We do anything.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a bad employee, but it will create some weird tension when I hire a director of sales later, but
Yeah.
he's an equity owner, and that may be fine, but
maybe
it can create
maybe I
some
have
weird.
a board. I might have a board.
I mean, if
something
anything, it may
different.
be a problem is his ego won't take it. He came in at the ground floor, and
Also likely.
now I've got to hire somebody else to manage him.
But
It
typically,
creates some weird problems.
though, somebody in that position you would fire and you would get their equity back.
You're out
That-
of here.
Okay, but now I'd have to say at what cost?
We define it in our agreement.
There you go. Wow. We defined a rainy day scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think now that let's talk about that from the other side and being the recipient. I think you have to try to always give yourself future thinking about, are
Absolutely.
you also putting yourself in a situation where you can get screwed?
Yes.
And that can happen a lot as well, right?
Right. Which I've seen where just people can vote their partners, off the island.
Yeah.
And say you've built a, 60 million revenue company in a couple years. And you're like, there's 3 of us, but if there was only 2, we'd make a lot more money. You've got exactly. And there's been some big examples of that have been on the front page of the Business Journal. And when I read their operating agreement, I was shocked that they, signed that. But, these people, they had not seen a lot of partnership operating agreements. They probably didn't really understand how it happened. They were all in the honeymoon phase of being partners and wildly successful. But if you have a way to get somebody out and you can make more money, it happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's use The Social Network movie as a good example. And, Eduardo, in that situation was able to be diluted down to next to nothing and wasn't paying attention, and he signed it. Now he ended up suing later and got a pretty fat judgment out of it. But you're talking about owning 25% or something of what is one of the world's most valuable companies.
Right.
The couple $100 million settlement he got was peanuts,
Right.
compared to what the value of what that could have been later. And that's just situations where you're not in a good spot. Now, I'll give you an opposing example. So at Full Scale, Matt and I own 50-50, and we don't have a whole bunch of stuff defined as far as tiebreakers. Now, Matt and I had known each other for a while. We felt comfortable with needing to agree on certain stuff, not just, hey, it's what I want to do or it's what he wants to do. So
We settle things with rock, paper, scissors.
yeah, which I always win. So
Great
I
legal
get
method.
my way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes flipping a coin might be as easy as other stuff, but in that particular situation, because Full Scale owns Startup Hustle, it owns some other things that we invest in. It owns the company that we technically also have in the Philippines that has 200 employees and stuff like that. So, we were okay with that, and we were legally advised to not do that, which is fair. It's good advice, but it's sometimes, now if we had 5 people, I would have said, no, that's crazy, because we'll never get anyone to agree.
Yeah. We never recommend 50-50, but it just in such fact specific, like in your case, you would have just said, we want to be 50-50. We want to risk it that we can work through any concerns that we have.
Part of that discussion was the possibility of like, while we haven't taken outside investment in an equity kind of way, if we did, that might be that person that had a deciding vote. But I mean, every situation's different, and these things are very, very, very much worth discussing ahead of time. And by the way, as a founder, don't give those shares away. Like, you got to think about where you're going to be in 3 years, and or 2 years or 1 year. And if you're thinking, okay, I want to raise $1 million in capital. Okay, at what valuation are you doing that? And then think about what that equity that you're
giving away does.
Yeah, that you're throwing everywhere. What the value of that
So
is.
can we talk for a second about giving away stock, because there's multiple ways to do it.
Right.
Can you talk us through like different ways you would do that with a founder or a key employee or?
Right. So typically if you have co-founders or you bring on some developers early on, they're just going to get common stock, and a lot of people just go, I want to give, Matt 3% and Bobby 5%.
Does that have a tax implication at that point, though?
Hopefully, because of that, it's a startup, the value is 0 at that time, so it's really a tax great.
That's something we didn't even talk about.
For tax
That's gonna be
purposes, a great time
too,
to give away equity. But then later on, you would have a vesting schedule. Once you start getting outside institutional investments, they all want you to have a stock option plan in place. That's typically 7 to 20% of your equity. And they want that available for key employees. And that usually has vesting schedules and rights to forfeiture and that kind of thing.
And there's strategy with that too. Like
Mhm.
having, I'm a big vested interest person, just meaning like as your company. Now, at the same time, I'm going to say this, like we don't currently do this at full scale because we're still on some levels, like figuring out like some of it, right?
We're still a startup.
Yeah. I mean, we're less than 2 years old, and some of that stuff, it's like, who are the key employees? And we've seen some that we thought might be come and go and made different changes and found different things to focus on over time.
But
So
I think you always feel like you're a startup as long as you're growing, because the person who might be your COO at year 2 may not be the right fit at year
Right.
5. So
Well, and
that's changing all the
yeah,
time.
and that's part of like, it's part of our future plans, but until we really find that mix, that lineup that works.
Mm-hmm.
So let me go back to Matt's question about equity. And there are a lot of ways you can incentivize employees without giving away equity. You could get restricted, stock appreciation rights, phantom equity, a bonus plan.
Phantom equity sounds
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. So
Does it wear a mask?
it does.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
What is phantom equity?
So phantom equity just tracks the valuation of the company. So you can structure it as contractual. It's not real equity.
I
So
see.
you can say, hey, our company's worth $10 million when you started. You're going to have 5% of any growth over $10 million. It's going to vest over time. We're going to pay you cash after the vesting is over, like in 5 years. So you can structure that a lot of different ways.
You need to make sure that if you're a founder and you're doing these things, that the implications of any kind of buybacks and stuff like that aren't going to cripple you later. Because they could like, I mean, all of a sudden you hit some milestone and now you've got to, okay, it's like a completely different issue that you've got to rise up and overcome.
One of my favorite things when we sold then was we had we used what was called profit interest only.
Yes,
stock,
we do that too.
Which was
Mhm.
these are
Yeah.
all just different
Non-equity.
And that
mechanisms.
and that's also relieve yourself of a potential tax event, right?
Although it's since it's just cash, it's ordinary income for employees, but
But the key thing there for me, it was really cool. After we sold the business, we had like 10 employees that were like millionaires that
Nice.
day, which was
Yeah.
really cool.
Mhm.
Really cool feeling to, people that really contributed to the growth, and building the company. And some of them came along a lot later. They weren't necessarily early employees. They were key hires later down the road too.
right. So
And it
there's-
was really cool moment.
yeah,
Share it with them.
there's a lot of different ways to get non-equity incentivize your key employees without giving away equity. And
Were you distracted by the glitz and glamour of the of the photographs being taken?
so much.
Do you know that you can find those
the camera going.
on the @Startup Hustle podcast Instagram?
Oh,
Usually, yeah.
and my lovely face is on YouTube.
Okay, so with the partnership issues and equity, then I want to move on to some of the other things on the list after this. This stuff's all important. Valuation is I always get a kick out
Yeah.
of people's
Me too.
valuation. So before we get into that, I'm going to say if you don't have any outside money coming in at any point, I don't think you can have a valuation. I mean, you can maybe later on down the road, but not in an early stage kind of way. Someone else's money coming in can validate your valuation. But I see people all the time. They're like, yeah, they're in year 1. They barely have any revenue. They don't even have a full market ready. And they're like, we're worth $4 million. I'm like, to who?
Yeah.
And I think the corollary to that is, and then they'll do a pitch, and literally every pitch says, in 5 years, we're going to be worth $100 million.
Right.
And it's always $100 million.
Get back to me in 5 years then.
Yes.
Well, and part of that is most investors won't invest anything unless it can get to that
Scale
level.
that way. Right.
And that's one of the things that people need to understand that are listening right now is if you've got a business that you don't think is ever going to be do more than $1 million in revenue or something, like nobody will ever invest in it.
Never.
You're like, never,
Yeah.
never, ever, ever. Forget it.
Well, so some of the things when I say that, and the reason that I think the outside money is a validating factor, because it actually does set in some way a street price. Meaning these are people that that they don't
100%.
work at your business, and we don't disclose terms. But I'll give you an example: was Healthy Hip Hop, and Healthy Hip Hop just actually has taken some money in for equity stakes, and it had a couple at a couple points in the timeline. But that was also a company that got a hell of a lot of grant money from a lot of different people. That grant money didn't do shit to raise the valuation other than like the typical post money kind of style. Hey, there's some more money in the bank.
Right.
But as different tranches of investment came in for small percentages, it did raise the price. And now you actually say, hey, look, at this point that someone that doesn't work here put money in at this point and this valuation, and then someone else did it at a later valuation at a higher point. Now I can say, hey, our shares are worth X. That doesn't mean I can sell them to anyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously when you go out to raise capital, you just want to get the highest number that can stick. And a lot of times, the investors will either say no or push back and tell you you're wrong. But it definitely gives you market information, data about what your valuation is.
Right. And I don't think like Matt's dad making an investment in our company would set that value either. But if it's like professional.
My company's worth $1 billion now. What do you mean?
Well, and I put $50 in at that valuation.
Yeah, and he got 0.0000001%.
But dude, that's what the shares are trading at right now.
Go down.
So I'd like to liquidate most of mine.
It's like the price of crypto. That's how it works.
I think that actually can often be exchanged for straight cash a little better. Okay, so now I think this is a good segue into the raising capital side. This is one of the hottest topics here at Startup Hustle, and also in many, many, many of my non-recorded conversations. So where are you seeing people make common mistakes related to that?
One, they don't understand that they are selling a security, and there's a lot of compliance related to that. So they'll be
True.
like, my neighbor's giving me $10,000 and my college friend's giving me $50,000, and they're not accredited investors, and they don't have the right documentation. They don't have the right disclosures. So it's already a hot mess. So kind of getting some advice up front. I also think from an operational perspective, you have to be ready to go raise capital because it takes so much time to pitch to investors. And if you get turned down, you've just wasted so much of your time, which you should have been focused on operating your business and making it more valuable. Because I see a lot of people sometimes who are really engaged in the startup community in Kansas City, they get too wrapped up in the pitch contest.
Raising capital is a full-time job.
But when you're ready.
At Stackify right now, we get past January, right? So it's January, New Year, and all of a sudden I got like 20 people coming out of the woodwork. People that could be investors, could be acquirers, could be different things. And it's like, oh my God, I could chase all these different rabbit holes, but it's just a lot of work.
Agree.
And it's a never ending, and the more successful your business becomes, the more work that you get from this too, because there's always private equity groups. There's different growth stage people. There's people that want to offer you debt. And then you got people like investment brokers all the time that are like, one of these days you'll sell your business. You need to know us. Like all these people, and then you got people that do want to acquire you that are like, wow, that's a huge strategic partner that could acquire us. And it's hard to know where to sink your time.
Right.
It's crazy.
And I think that it's also difficult to figure out what approach to take, because it feels on many days there's an infinite number of ways to raise capital. Just meaning like the framework of it.
Right.
You mentioned there's debt, there's equity, there's all these different like approaches. You have all different kinds of agreements and I think people don't usually understand convertible debt.
Oh my gosh, everybody's using convertible debt right now, but no one understands it.
Well, then let's talk about it for a second.
So convertible debt is used because the company doesn't want to do a valuation and they don't want to set their value. So they don't want to do a fixed price round. They want to decide that earlier. So it's a quick way to get money in. There's not as much due diligence. I don't know if that's fair, but there's not as much documentation. The legal work's much quicker.
It makes it easier because you're not fully agreeing on a price.
Right.
Now, with that, convertible debt, in order to convert, is reliant on additional capital being brought in.
Right. The hard part, I think, is people are like, we're just going to take these convertible notes, but we're not going to raise capital. Well, I think the whole point of a convertible note is you're going to get a price round later. So unless
there's usually kind of a bridge between rounds.
Yes. So I think you just have to be prepared that you're going to do a round later to price that and have those notes convert.
We had that issue at Stackify where we did some convertible notes, and then we got to a point where we really didn't have like a final qualifying event, and so we just had to kind of convert all the notes.
Yeah, so
like we'd set it up like we had to have like an investor come in, like an institution, but we didn't. So all we had.
And by
was
the way,
notes.
if you're trying to raise convertible debt, do not repeat the following words. we aren't planning on raising any more debt
Right.
or
Yeah.
taking
Capital.
any other investment past here, because
Yes.
that will, I mean, that's, you literally, let me translate that. We aren't planning on taking other investment, which means your investment will never turn into anything that is well defined or
Right. So you
tradable.
Yeah.
So if there's no investment, you probably should have a backup plan what happens. But investors in convertible notes want the upside of your rapidly growing tech company. They don't want a return on just their promissory note rate of return.
Well,
they
and
don't want that.
And that's what happened with our notes is it had terms that basically said by this date, if it's not converted, it could convert at the previous round price or whatever,
Right.
Different stipulations. And
Which could be a much lower valuation, and they get a 20% discount.
There's situations that I was just reading about one, where a company had taken in a pretty significant early round of convertible debt and then never raised any capital past that, and literally had, $20 million worth of investors sitting out there years later, and
Waiting.
they had nothing. Some of them had sued. Like they weren't happy about that at all, because that trigger didn't exist to convert the debt.
It's got to be an expiration.
It was just kind of hanging out there, and like the company had been profitable for a while. They didn't technically own anything. I mean, there was just a whole myriad of things.
And you probably don't have a board seat, or you don't have any way to influence.
I don't know those details, but I know that there was a lot of angry people.
So we just took on a client from St. Louis who had used another law firm, and they have convertible notes, but they have a formula like it's 5 times the revenue at May 21st on 2021. So they have an out. So they have put a formula in, and I think that's one way. If you're not going to do a round, like there's a backstop for getting paid and conversion amount.
And speaking of law firms, if you want to learn more about Sheila and Seck Associates, and that's SECK, you can go to seckandassociates.com. There you go. There's some free advertisement.
We love that.
Yeah, I figured we have to. I don't want to get an invoice for this for this afterward, but okay. So raising capital, hey, if you're listening, we have so many episodes on that subject. Go back and check them out. So we talked a little bit about partnership issues, equity issues, raising capital, and that still pertains to ownership. What about just basic documentation and setup on like the state and federal level?
I think that's the early on part, and really the least expensive to form your company, get a tax ID, get kind of all the business licenses that you need. That's pretty straightforward and isn't expensive. I mean, it's definitely worth the amount that you'll spend if you're having any thoughts that you're going to be a real deal company, and you should do that early on. So I think the best thing in using legal services to like communicate with your attorney what make sure that the expectations are clear on price, how many hours are going to be billed, what your goals are. Can you wait to do some of the documentation later? Can you amend the operating agreement when you raise capital, and you'll live with the bad LegalZoom draft for now? So there's a lot of ways you can manage that cost early on and still end up with a really good outcome over, a period of time.
So you mentioned we've mentioned the quote LegalZoom thing a lot. They're just going to they just send you a kit. And it's not very well defined, because I've done this before. I mean, you can get set up on the state level, like they'll file the papers, they'll give you an EIN and stuff like that. And then they send you a bunch of stuff that you're supposed to fill out. And I think most people don't.
They don't, or it's completely wrong. I just have a really rapidly growing company, and they had used LegalZoom, and we took them over. Well, it costs a lot. It's cost way more for us to redo it than if they had started, because, for example, they had some convertible notes, but there was no equity to convert. They didn't have enough authorized shares. So they would have had to authorize shares, or these people would have not legally had shares to get on the conversion.
I think some of that stuff makes sense for like the sole proprietor that's not a good setup for your business, by the way.
Or maybe it's a small retail store, or you're going to do some consulting out of your house, and you're going to be a one-person show.
Some of that might make sense. Yep. But if you're planning on doing something a little bigger, and by the way, most businesses actually are similar to what we just described and defined.
Yes.
So now with that, I don't think we need legal documentation or disclaimers or contracts to play mixtape, do we?
Nope.
Can we disclaim and really make Sheila nervous that she voiced to us in a very non-confidential way?
My confidence has grown.
She has had to be she's bound to attorney-client privilege with us but that doesn't go both ways. So, all right, I pulled a card from the mixtape deck, and by the way, if you want to check out Mixtape, the app, it's out. All right, so the best song for speeding down the Pacific Coast Highway at sunset. I'm going with "Going the Distance" by Cake.
Oh, I like that.
He's going the distance. And by the way, I'm going for speed.
I'm going the pop version, "Party in the USA" by Miley Cyrus.
Interesting. My daughter was singing that the other day, and I'm still conflicted
Convertible,
about how I feel.
"Party in the," I mean,
I'm going
come
to do
on.
Life is a Highway by Tom Collins.
Ooh.
Also a good answer. All right, you can't vote for yourself. Man, I'm going to do this a couple episodes in a row. I'm voting for Watson.
Me too. And I thought I was going to have the winner.
You won.
Wow, I'm voting for
Congratulations.
Party in the USA.
in the most
It's
most meaningless vote since the last time I voted for a Democrat in Kansas. Oh, is this a good time to point out that our president doesn't know that Kansas City is actually in Missouri?
Yeah, he literally tweeted, did you see this about the Super
Everywhere.
Bowl? Oh my God.
I'm going to try
But
to
New York City is also in New Jersey, right?
Right.
I'm trying to raise public
That's a problem
awareness. Kansas City is technically in Kansas and Missouri.
It is. It's in both.
But the Chiefs play in Missouri. So
But I also do think all the people that live in Kansas feel like the Chiefs are their team. It's such
But-
a
well, sure.
cross state lines kind of thing.
But technically,
It
And
is
by the way,
not
the San
at all
Francisco
in Kansas.
49ers are not in San Francisco.
No, they're in
And
Santa
the New York
Clara,
Giants
yeah.
are not in New York.
by
And
the
the New
way,
York Jets are not in New York.
I've been to the Niners'
They
new
play in New
stadium.
Jersey.
The Niners' new stadium's in Santa Clara is technically closer to San Jose than it is to San Francisco. Yeah. Went to SneakerCon.
This is
in
Chiefs
the building
Kingdom.
next to it.
Yes, it is. What a great.
Whole Midwest is
Are you-
red.
By the way, are you guys going to the parade on Wednesday?
I don't know.
No, but they close schools.
I typically I managed to turn the Startup Hustle sign red right after we took
Everybody will
pictures.
have red flu on Wednesday.
True. That you talk about, and by the way, I'm looking forward to some of our guests later this week because we'll talk about how Super Bowl affects a city. But one of the things is, we'll have a parade. They will shut school. School
Yeah.
will not be a thing.
I mean,
on
you would have
Wednesday.
to for the downtown Kansas City school districts because all the roads will be closed and everything else. You have to.
Our lowest revenue month in 12 years of business was the month that the Royals were in the
Really?
in the World Series.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
'Cause
Oh,
so many entrepreneurs
Yeah, that
have
makes sense.
tickets and the games
yeah.
are
The
during
world.
the
Well, the
day.
World
Yeah,
Series
every
is
day.
The World
Yeah.
Series and playoffs in baseball occur over a series of days and weeks
Yeah.
too.
Yes.
So, like the Super Bowl was pretty finite. It's
Right.
not here in our hometown. When the Royals were in the World Series, I mean, between playoffs and the World Series, it's
It's an everyday thing.
well, that's about 21 days
Yeah.
because we had them go the distance.
Yep.
And there's 2 rounds of playoffs and then the series. So,
And if you're entrepreneurial and you might have a flexible schedule and you just like to go to, you're probably outgoing or just want to go to that, it was dead.
I'm
Yeah.
interested to see how our sweet and greet event on Wednesday goes.
Post Malone.
Right down. I know, but right after the
Parade.
the parade and directly on the parade route.
Yeah,
Not
good
only
luck with
on
that.
one side of the venue, but both.
Good luck with that.
I bet he's a hot ticket.
Yeah, it was very popular, but man, I'm just, the talk about first world problems. I'm concerned that my parking space will have been sold to someone else. and that was going to upset me if I'm there.
There might be somebody in your parking spot right now getting their parade spot.
Yeah, I get it. And if that is you, get out of my parking spot, man. All right.
I'm going to be tweeting #fullscale when I'm there Friday night.
There you go.
At Sweet and Greet.
That's
what's Friday night?
Friday?
Is it Thursday?
Thursday? Are you going? Miranda Lambert?
Miranda
Are you
Lambert.
some's guest?
Innovate her, Casey.
There you go. I was like, I need to
okay.
know something if that wasn't. Yes. I got confused there for a second. Yeah. I asked Lauren, who's been on the show, to Innovate Her. I'm like, am I being openly sexist by giving Innovate Her tickets for Kelly Clarkson, Miranda Lambert, and other things that seem to clearly be,
Girl power.
yeah, but that's fine. I will be in the suite.
Not Post
I will
Malone.
be in the suite on Thursday with 15 women, most likely. And good for me. Okay, so back to the hustle here. A couple things on the way out. I have a note here talking about specific vendor terms and how that is sometimes a challenge.
So what I see, and it causes our clients so many problems, is that they enter into these agreements with no termination clause. So you have a provider who's costing you, $5,000 a month. You have no way to terminate. I've had more clients end up in litigation over terminating vendor contracts. even if the service is terrible. So if you are entering into any kind of vendor contract, make sure that you have an ability to get out of it if they're not performing. I know it seems so simple, but it's the most difficult thing to negotiate, especially with, a larger service provider.
Unless you're hiring full scale, which you should then check the box for infinite.
Well, we just had this problem at Stackify. We've got a tool we're using from a vendor, and it's not working right now. And they aren't fixing it. And they just sent us our annual renewal and want us to mail them a bunch of money.
Right.
I'm like, no.
But then they'll say, look at the contract. You owe us this money.
I'm like, I'm not renewing this. This shit doesn't even work.
I know, but I've ended up with litigation over the
I
same
hear
fact
ya.
pattern. It's like the most simple, but it is the most problematic for people who end up owing a lot of money.
I think one thing to consider as well is if you are a vendor is the language of your contract that you give to people. Because while it might sound super awesome to sign lengthy vendor agreements in the early life cycle of your business, you might look at those in a year and be like, oh my God, what have we done?
Yeah.
Right. Or we don't need this, or we've pivoted and it's just not something that's good for
or
us.
This is like wildly unprofitable and now I'm chained to it, which is, things change. And I think that people make mistakes when it comes to that about not doing things like, giving some language that either, your cost of doing business is going to rise over time. That's just a simple economic fact.
Right.
And therefore, if your price is locked in for years upon years, and we've talked about this a lot in past episodes, just because what appears to be a whale of a client swims near the boat doesn't mean that's the best path for you to take.
Agreed.
Because that whale requires all hands on deck to get it on the deck. And you might find that creates a lot of opportunity costs for you.
And the whale often knows that you're a young startup and they will beat you down on price all day long.
The whale will swallow the minnow.
So I like things like Casey Collective. Shout out to them. That can help get discounts or free services and stuff.
Right.
That's actually a great mention. And, they have a upcoming, it's free startup stuff.
Mm-hmm. And there's other groups that do this sort of thing. This is more of a Kansas City thing, but there are other, like Brex reward cards. They have some, if you sign up for Brex, and you can get free AWS and free this.
And
I have a lot of clients that use those.
Stuff like that.
And that's a sales channel for some of these big vendors. But if someone's going to give you free stuff and you don't have to negotiate that whole thing yourself, like look for those things.
We signed up for Brex, and all of a sudden I get an extra $5,000 free on Amazon Web Services. I'm like,
sold.
Cool.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but okay.
Sold.
We'll take it.
Hey, but that's the point is, so those companies realize that they can leverage the size of their constituents, as we'll call it, or clients. And that's a big sales channel for someone like AWS or whatever. What do we need to do to get more people to sign up here?
I reached out to Casey Collective because they had like a special discount for Carta.
Yeah.
And so then I reached out to Carta. I'm like, hey, how do I get this special discount? I'm getting it. All I do is ask.
Also, Carta will, if you, for some reason, they're law firm focused. If you sign up through your law firm, you also get a discount.
Ah, okay.
You could have stacked discounts at
Stackify.
Up.
Yeah, stack them up.
I mean, I would think that you would always look for a stack.
And we were a big fan of Carta at Seck Associates.
Oh, okay. I'm new.
It's a really great way to manage your cap table.
Okay. There's various tools out there for that. And,
shout out to that.
It's like, what are you going to do? Okay. So Sheila, you're the founder of a law firm. And as we end episodes of Startup Hustle, we do what we call the Founders Freestyle. And that is really just a chance for you to say whatever you want to say on your way out. And I know so much of this episode was centric around the original partnership agreements. I think that's really where things kind of fail early for people, but and that's not a suggestion on what to talk about, but you can really go wherever you want and say, what are your closing arguments?
Yes. What I would say is before you enter into a partnership agreement, before you even need to call your lawyer, you need to talk culturally, do we have the same goals? Does my partner want a lifestyle business, or do we hope to, really grow this and launch a major company? Is that person going to work in the business? So making sure that you have a cultural fit is huge. And then talking with an attorney about all these different triggering events, whether it's death, your divorce, if somebody's disabled, is it okay if they're a passive owner? There's just so many things around the partnership agreement and how you can, buy equity out if it goes badly.
You know what they say? The only kind of ship that doesn't sail is a partnership. That's what they say,
He's
right?
here on the show for this very
Yeah.
reason.
I'm stealing that joke.
Yeah. A lot of businesses fail. I don't know what the percentage is because
lot.
of legal problems.
Yes.
And my first business, Fin Solutions, should have failed because of legal problems. You know, we had a business partner that was a problem and couldn't get rid of him, and then he sued us. And you know, you go through these things, right? And can be very problematic.
Right.
And so it's just interesting, and that's why vesting is great, and just trying to keep it simple, and you have to protect you have to play defense a little bit, right?
Right.
And
And you have to
set
have
things
buy-up.
up for things to go wrong, and
make
Yeah.
great clarity. Like if you are doing these bad things, the other partners can buy you out, and this is what you're going to get paid.
yeah.
And that needs to be in the partnership agreement very clearly. And I think it avoids litigation.
And your point
and-
earlier about what is the goal of the company, right? Like, you know, we have these conversations sometimes about full scale. I mean, is this, how big do we want this to be? How fast are we going to grow? How much risk do we want to take? Like, these are all questions that you have to have with your business partners, and
Which,
they're
by the
not
way,
in
are
alignment.
which are
Great
questions
problems.
that come up with potential future partners or
Yeah.
investors. As we haven't gotten too serious about that, but as we've stuck the toe in the pool, that's something that came up. Would either of you like to add anything else before I shut this sucker down?
One
Go
last
Chiefs.
thing.
Yeah,
is,
that's why I
As
asked.
much as everyone hates it, attorneys have a bad name. Sometimes like it's worth every penny to get some great legal advice early on.
So, and before I close this out, and I've got a couple things to say that I think are worth making it all the way to the end of this episode if you're listening. Well, first off, you can go to Seck Associates, SECK Associates.com, and check out what Sheila does. We've used their firm before. They do a good job. And it's, regardless of whether you're in Kansas City or anywhere, they can help you. So now you mentioned that lawyers aren't all bad. I mentioned my dad's an attorney, and I've been around attorneys my whole life. There's good ones and there's bad ones. And my notes for Sheila mentioned finding a good fit for your partners in your business. Well, I think you also need to try to find a good fit with your attorney. A lot of people have a tendency to just grab the first one that they find. They're like, my wife's cousin,
Yes.
John, is an attorney. Well, there's a shitload of attorneys out there, and they don't all specialize in what you need to do.
Agree.
So sometimes people look at legal fees and they say, "Oh, well, this is so expensive." Well, there's a reason that it's expensive per hour, and that's because someone with targeted and very deep knowledge on the things you need knowledge about can give you that information in a very short amount of time.
Yes.
And that's what you're paying for. You're not necessarily paying for 1 hour of service. You're paying for the lifetime of accumulation of that knowledge, which is why you see a lot of attorneys that are old. Like they say attorneys don't ever really retire. They just play more golf.
Kind of look at it like a mentor in some ways.
Yeah,
right?
well, but it's because as you continue to acquire this experience and understanding, you see things that have gone well, that have not gone well, and there's just a whole world. Laws change, situations change, everything changes. So I think if you're going to find an attorney, it's good to find someone that already has that specializes in what you need help with. Otherwise, you're just going to pay someone to have to go acquire. They're going to have to go do a lot of research and figure it out. And I think that's a good way to run up a big legal bill.
Or to just not get very educated advice.
Yeah, right.
Everyone
right.
can Google.
Right. And then another thing, and I think people don't necessarily think about this first off when it comes to their attorneys. The right attorney has a whole lot of other clients that sometimes they can kind of help you network into other people.
Yeah,
and that's not necessarily a primary goal, but I look at different scenarios. Like you do business with a hell of a lot of local businesses.
Right.
Now that said and I've had these conversations with you, like if you had the ability to introduce two people to each other, you might. It's not necessarily part of what you promise, but that can exist. And then I think, and the final part of it is, really, as you talk to an attorney, you got to start considering, like, is this person always going to take my best interest at heart? Or am I just a column and a billable hours
Right.
situation?
Cha-ching,
Yeah.
cha-ching.
And that's the thing is, like, they do have to generate money and they do have to generate revenue, but is the advice that I'm going to get, does it have a level of purity and non-selfishness that, directs, hey, I think we should litigate if that's the answer for everything.
We never say that.
Well, right. But that's good because that's expensive.
And I think there's so many things that can be worked out without litigation.
Sure.
But we like to lead with the client goals. We like to think that we are coming from a very customized, pro-client perspective.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Well, once again, go to Seck Associates if you want to check out what they do. You can see learn more about the business that Matt and I own at fullscale.io, which, by the way, has a blog with very, very informative articles about how to do a whole lot of stuff. See y'all next time.
Thank you.